It's an old story. At first, they seem ridiculous. The big egos, the bad ideas. Some of them seem almost comical. Not here, the people say. Yet men like these find their following because they know how to use hate and fear. Fear of foreigners, immigrants, and minorities. Of Jews, Muslims, Christians. They dismiss the experts, demonize the press, promise they alone can deliver better lives and brighter futures. If they could only be rid of the obstacles to that power. Eventually, enough people buy it. They hand the fate of their nations over to madmen. But then suddenly, it's not so funny. The military deploys on the streets to protect the leader. Names appear on enemy lists. Opposition voices are silenced or imprisoned. The leader promises the right bloodlines will survive, and the wrong ones will be purged. It's an old story, one that could never happen here. The very idea is ridiculous, almost comical. There's no one dividing us, no one telling us who to hate, who to put in cages, no one demonizing the press, dismissing the experts, no would-be savior claiming he alone can fix our problems if only the obstacles to power are removed. No one singling out the other, telling us what should become of them. No enemy lists, no threats of imprisonment. No one lashing out when their ego is threatened, demanding absolute loyalty and using the military to control the streets. No, it can't happen. Not here. We know too well how it begins, and it's always been up to us how it ends.
My presentation is going to have a little bit of a different take. I'm focusing on understanding the conservative perspective on abortion. I want to talk about the role of religious beliefs and values in politics and provide some guidance for what we can do. So we take the biblical perspective or the supernatural perspective, the religious perspective, and we go to, and we see that, like Dom said, God breathed breath into the clay Adam. And that word breath also means spirit. So God breathed spirit. Life is animated by spirit. The prophet Jeremiah said, having God speaking to him, God says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. The prophet Isaiah said the Lord had called him from the womb, from the body of his mother. He named my name. And the name in the ancient world carries the essence of the individual. That was the belief, and we'll see that more. The Apostle Paul, as I said, who wrote many of the books of the New Testament, said that God had set him apart before he was born. The Psalms, which is usually attributed to King David, says, "For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb." Even Christians have some sense of being predestined or some prior existence. We said God chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him in love. And this is from Ephesians. Ephesians is a very spiritual book, but also a very political book that talks about the powers and authorities. The powers and authorities include the empire and the rulers. And so there was no separation of religion and politics in the ancient world. It was a theology. theocracies, where everything was just theocracy. The kings and emperors were gods and sons of gods. Priests were politicians. And that's just how it was in the ancient world. So the same book says God chose us in him before the foundation of the world. And then he predestined us for adoption as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of his will. And Paul writes to the Romans, he says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that they may be firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called, and those who he called, he justified, and those who he justified, he glorified. And of course, Jesus, right, was foreknown before the foundation of the world and was made manifest in these last times for the sake of you, says the author of 1 Peter. And then there's John 3:16, the verse that they always hold up at football games and other places, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. And I want to add verse 17 that because it's important, I think, to understanding that passage and is often overlooked. But God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. The angel Gabriel, when Joseph learned that Mary, his fiance, was pregnant, had planned to dismiss Mary quietly, because adultery was a death penalty offense. So a woman being found pregnant, not by her husband, could face death by stoning. So Joseph didn't want to put Mary through that or hold her up to ridicule. So he planned to quietly dismiss her, but the angel Gabriel came to him and said, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Now, the Gospel of Luke takes this problem differently, the problem of being pregnant without having, outside of wedlock, or outside, not by your husband. And what he does is he has Mary make haste to take this long trip to see a distant relative in Judea. Mary is about 13 years old, and this trip would have to have been like 100 miles or something around Samaria. And so she makes haste to see this distant relative, Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth is the wife of a high priest named Zachariah. And what we know about them is that both of them were righteous before God, living blamelessly according to all the commandments of the Lord. So what does that mean? That says basically that if Mary goes before Zachariah, it's lights out for her. In other words, they obey the law, and the law called for death by stoning. But the angel Gabriel comes to Zechariah, goes into the Holy of Holies, the area of the temple where only priests are allowed. He's assigned that day, and it's a vision. He sees the angel Gabriel, and the angel Gabriel tells him, your wife will bear a son, and you will name him John. This is John the Baptist that is being predestined. And Zechariah says, how do I know this to be true? I mean, I'm an old man and my wife is old. And the angel Gabriel gets upset. And this priest should have known, you're talking to the angel Gabriel in the Holy of Holies, you You should know. And so he says, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in your time, you will become mute, unable to speak until the day these things occur, which means Mary's saved, right? When the angel comes to Mary, she says simply the same thing. How do I know? Because I'm a virgin. But when she arrives to Mary, and Mary hears, or to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth hears Mary's greeting, the child in Elizabeth's room leapt in her room, it is said, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit and exclaimed with a loud cry, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For as soon as I heard the sound of your greeting, the child in my womb leapt for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken her by the Lord." And that's when Mary breaks into her famous song, the Magnificat, in which she says things like, "God brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly, has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and the descendants." And God has promised Abraham's seed would make a great nation. And so there's a lot of this imagery of pronatalism in the Bible. Israel was surrounded by enemies and needed to grow to become a strong nation. So,
Richard, I think I'm losing you here. So I mean, I really did want to hear or understand the pro-choice position in evangelicalism or Catholicism or any other biblical basis, but you're losing me in terms of understanding the direct connection between the pro-choice position and the Bible. I feel like you're getting into a lot of things that are hard to follow for someone who is trying to talk to Christians about choice.
well, let me. Yeah, I'm moving away from that right now. So the Catholics, and really, I'm not sure that that's the objective of my presentation, although I will tell you how to talk to Christians about it. But I want you to understand the depths with which these beliefs come and where they come from and why it's not all evil. And I think that's the first step.
Seems to me that it's an emotional thing. I've talked to lots and lots of self-proclaimed pro-lifers, and it's an emotional thing to get really worked up about the idea of murdering babies. Their idea of an abortion is a perfectly healthy fetus being killed literally the day before full term. I mean, it's just astounding. They don't need education about what the Bible means. They need education about the facts of life, the situations of women. I believe there was somebody that worked on creating and compiling stories of abortion and the situations that people got into. And they really help illustrate the fact that women in difficult circumstances do not deserve the contempt and the hatred that the pro-lifers put upon them. And the way that they style physicians who do abortions as evil monsters. I've practiced OBGYN for more than 35 years, and I can tell you how tightly the option of abortion is integrated into medical care. And this is just a disaster that we're not going to have that choice now. Women are going to die, not just from botched back alley abortions, but because physicians will be afraid to intervene and have to worry about being prosecuted for murder if they make appropriate medical decisions.
That's correct. And why? And the question is not what they need to know, because we're not really talking to them right now. The question is, what do we need to know? And so I just want to talk about the value of life being sacred in the Christian religion. And that's the Catholic approach. They also say that life is, you can't kill because that's God's power, but the sacredness of life is in the Genesis myth. And it's important to remember that at creation, everyone was a vegetarian. You did not need to kill to survive. God says, I've given you every tree and seed and its fruit, and you shall have them for food. And he's given even all the beasts of the land, every green plant, for food. We're vegetarians. God did not want to kill. In fact, it really isn't until the story of Cain and Abel, when Cain kills his brother, and God doesn't kill him for doing that. God sends him away, and he says, but they're going to see me. I'm going to be a wanderer, and they're going to kill me. And God says, no, I'm going to put a mark on you so that anybody who sees you would not kill you. And that mark, terrible things have been spoken about it, but that mark, at a minimum, it says, do not kill. So it wasn't until Noah when God authorized the eating of flesh, and so of meat, and also established the death penalty for killing another human being. And so, yeah, so here's what we see is that life is sacred because God also required a sacrifice. And that's very different from how we view life when we just pick up a piece of meat. All life is sacred. And that's why you had to make a sacrifice to recognize that life is sacred.
Richard, I don't know how to cut through all of that in order to be able to reach religious people to understand that. I mean, is it basically a losing proposition here to be able to try to reason with religious people on their own territory? Because I'm hearing a lot of stuff about the sanctity of life, and I mean, that's the, I get chapter and verse on that from pro-life people. But what I'm trying to understand is the value of women and the value of, because of the fact that the Bible sanctions slavery. Where does it get, where do we get away from that? Did Jesus get away from that? Did Jesus say, look, slavery is wrong and owning another person's body is wrong? I don't know enough about Jesus or his writings to even understand whether that's possible to have that type of discussion.
Well, Jesus, I think, overturns this rule about the death penalty because he's there with an abuse of power when they kill him for advocating for a just society. And there is a part of the Bible, Exodus, that talks, the Bible doesn't really talk about abortion per se. There is a passage that says if two men scuffle and deal a blow to a pregnant woman and the child aborts forth, then the man is fined. That's Exodus 21, 22 to 25, not charged with murder. Now, that doesn't match with our laws. Our laws, if you do that, you could be charged for that death. But in the ancient time, they were fined. Unless the woman was harmed, then it's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand. And it's imposed by, the fine is imposed by the husband or male judges because they're property. Women are considered property. So
that's a really good point. So wait, so you skipped over this a bit, but you said something about that the whole law about the two men scuffling, that the woman, that the child, the pregnant woman, is not two different people, basically. Am I understanding that what you're
Well,
saying correctly?
Well, she's kind of property. And although if she were killed, it would be just like murder and the death, the same penalty, or injured, it would be the same penalty. But sort of in a way, it's really more of the man's property than it is the woman being a separate individual. But the child, it's not a murder. You're not killing a human being. You're subject to a fine for that.
Richard, can I possibly interrupt for just a minute on this exact point? Thank you. Christianity is divided by three doctrines of ensoulment. Two of them are pre-Christian in authorship. The third one, authored by a Christian, St. Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s. Mm-hmm. The first two that are pre-Christian, one was by Pythagoras, who was a great mathematician in ancient times, but a few hundred years or so before Jesus was born, he decided to make his own religion, which is fine. That's what people do. Whether Moses, Muhammad, Saul, or Paul on the road to Damascus, or Joseph Smith, I guess it was, is that the right name, in New York State for Mormonism. And 1,600 different religions all have an exclusive, unique grip on truth and reality, okay? So it's all ideas, it's all mental. Now, the Pythagorean idea, one of the doctrines was, its doctrine of ensoulment, was that there was a spirit of life in the product of conception. If you can't recognize and relate that to all the crap that's going around now for 30, 40 years, you're unaware, okay? The product of conception was just the pre-scientific language for a fertilized egg. All right, so that's the origin of life begins at conception. And for Pope Francis, the fertilized egg is a one-cell baby and all the value that goes along with that. The other pre-Christian version, which you cited in the book of Genesis and Exodus, chapters 21 to 25, thou shalt not kill. But that when does that protected human life begin? That's ensoulment. When does it end? That's desoulment, theologically speaking. And what's the nature? We only have to concern on this issue with the ensoulment. When does a new human life begin? And as you point out, the Bible story in Exodus chapters 21 to 25, two endings to that story. When the woman gets hit, the pregnant woman gets hit by the blow. One of the guys wasn't even trying to hit her, but somehow she got struck. And down she goes. And in the first ending, she's killed. And then the next chapter begins. What happens to one of the men or both men? So the next chapter starts off life for life. So at least we know that a woman, just like a man, a boy, or a girl, is indeed a human life, a human being, which some people seem to doubt a little bit. The other ending of the story, she lives, but the fetus is killed. As you point out, the man has to pay either fine or damages for interfering with her reproductive interest, the assumption being she wanted to deliver a baby. So that's the stark opposite of the Pythagorean idea that even a fetus is not yet the life of a human being. Its potential is developing, but not there yet. The third version from Thomas Aquinas in 1200s, I think it was, is that life begins with quickening or the first movement. But there's even uncertainty about what he meant or what the translators meant. That might have been based on an ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible into ancient Greek, which occurred around 197 BC, something like that. And they made some mistakes in the translation, which you would expect. One of them was a mistranslation of the Hebrew word for breath, and they translated it as move or movement. So the question is ambiguous. Any old movement or just the movement associated with breathing, which would mean chest movement, So even that's a little uncertain. Yeah. A scientific and values-based approach would be that when do you actually get what's the minimal thing that you need to support the beginning of mentality? Just a little itty bitty. That's all it takes.
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I need to get through because I'm already going over. I didn't really time this very well. So I want to move to 1963 with Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, in which she identified the problem with no name, which was the idea that women were dissatisfied with their roles as homemakers. Their talent was being wasted. They didn't have autonomy. And so, and also the idea that the personal is political, that their personal lives and the problems they were having, the problem without name, was actually a political problem. And it's important to recognize that personal beliefs and values, we want to say religions people should not have their personal beliefs and values influence their political decisions. But that's like coming from outer space. There's no world in which our personal beliefs and values do not influence our political decisions. So there's no way we can go no politics with these people, or in religion, no politics. In fact, when we separated the church and the state, we did not separate religion from politics. We only separated the institutions of the church and the state. Religion has been political all along. It's political now. It's going to be political in the state into the foreseeable future. To restrict people from having their religious values influence their political beliefs would be against the First Amendment. Church and state, the church state is supposed to be benevolent towards the church. It's not supposed to take sides or choose one position over another. And it's only the state that is precluded from acting. Churches can do anything they want. It's only the tax code that prevents them from engaging in campaigning. And then, but on social issues, the churches do and should have actions. So religion is about philosophy, theology, ideology, beliefs, and values. So even some spiritual people feel the same way, and people of other religions feel the same way about abortion. The church should be engaged in social justice advocacy. And there's a lot of things that help support the idea that women and lifting up the lowly, being concerned for the lives of women and girls and children, and taking their interest in the heart are very important. And Jesus, over and over, women would defeat him in debate. I don't think there's any denial that we need to also consider the interest of women and girls. So I want to encourage everyone to get personal. Don't try and say that religion cannot be come into our political discussion. It's already there. It's going to be there. It's not going away. Tell your personal story. Listen to what other people have to say before you tell them your appearance. Ask them questions. Find something to agree with. A lot of the stuff Dr. Tamarius told us again, because this is not just about freedom. It's about justice. It's about our community and how we treat other women. And then we have this attack on Christianity, Christian nationalism. It's ill-defined. And we don't want to, in short, we just don't want to make religion the enemy, Christians the enemy. It's not, we have this idea that somehow we get these ideas and they all bubble up and that's what creates our social opinion. No, that's not how it works. Propagandists know what our opinions are. They disseminate propaganda down that uses our already held positions to make us more extreme or persuade us to their view. This is a top-down problem, not a bottom-up problem. So what do? We need to welcome Christians into our groups. We need to use Christian rhetoric, biblical rhetoric, religious, spiritual rhetoric. We don't want to be dismissive or abusive towards people who are on our side. We want to support them and bring them on. And don't worry, God is on our side. So I have a saying, they say, hate the sin, not the sinner. I say, hate the propaganda, not the people. Hate the propagandists who keep spreading lies, not the people who are lost sheep, as Jesus would say.
Just like